Welcome to the Project Success Through History podcast, where we connect history with project and leadership lessons. Today we're stepping into one of Europe's most extraordinary architectural stories. A project that spans ambition, interruption, resilience and renewal. We're talking about Cologne Cathedral in Germany, a building that took more than 6 centuries to complete and still stands as a symbol of endurance and human creativity. What I love about this story isn't that it's just about stone and towers. It's about a vision. It's about leadership across generations, and it's about what it takes to keep a project alive long after the original team has gone. To explore this with me, I'm joined by Eric Lengling, who started his career as a chemist and later became an occupational hygienist with over 40 years of industry experience. Eric brings a rich blend of historical insight and personal connections to the cathedral. We're going to unpack the history, the surprises, and the lessons we can draw for modern projects and leadership. Eric, it's wonderful to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me, David. Look, my connection with Cologne goes back a fair few years. My parents migrated to Australia from Düsseldorf, which is about 40 kilometres away from Cologne, back in the 60s. My first visit to Cologne was in 1985. And one of the interesting facts about Cologne and Düsseldorf, similar to Sydney and Melbourne in Australia, Cologne and Düsseldorf were having a bit of an argument after World War II as to which of those big important cities would become the capital of the new West Germany. Similar to Sydney and Melbourne, the government said, look, we're sick of you two fighting. We're going to pick something completely different. In Australia, it became the city of Canberra, and in Germany, or West Germany, it became the city of Bonn, a small city between the two cities. So that's why Bonn became the capital. And Cologne, as I said, is 40 kilometres or so away from Düsseldorf, and even their dialect is different to those of the people of Düsseldorf. It's interesting because people didn't travel back in the day. They couldn't travel more than a day's on horseback or by horse and carriage, so they didn't do much travelling. So the dialects sort of formed where we don't have that issue so much here in Australia. So David, my first visit to Cologne, or Köln as it's said in German, was back in 1985. I came down from Düsseldorf by train, and the amazing thing is when you travel by train through some of these old cities in Germany, the railway lines are so close to the buildings, you can almost touch the curtains as you're going past people's apartments. And all of a sudden, this huge structure comes into view. Obviously, in Germany, it's called the Kölner Dom, Dom being cathedral, and just amazing, these huge, large spires coming up in front of you. My first experience of actually entering the Dome, though, was in 1996, 30 years ago. And we actually got to climb up to one of the spires. And it was amazing. Stories and stories high, going up spiral staircases till we went past the bells of the cathedral and then up some wooden ladders to the very, very top. And you're looking across to the other spire that was being worked on by workmen. So it was just an amazing structure, amazing architecture, and it's something I'm really fascinated about. The other thing I'm really fascinated about is the project and how it was actually operated from go to woe. What's the longest project you've ever worked on, David?
I would say probably 5 years.
5 years. So often they're 3 years, 5 years, maybe 10. Now, imagine starting on a project knowing with absolute certainty that you will never, ever see it finished. In 1248, the people of Cologne laid the first stone of what would become the tallest cathedral in the world at that time. They called it a building project, but history would call it something else. It was basically a project that defied time. Construction of the Cologne Cathedral began in the Middle Ages, and then something remarkable happened. It stopped for centuries. Wars came and went, plagues swept Europe, kings rose and fell, and all of the while, in the centre of Cologne, the cathedral stood unfinished, cranes frozen in place for generations. Yet no one said, this project has failed. Why? Because the cathedral was never just a building. No project director ever cut the ribbon. No leader put their name on a plaque and said, this was my cathedral. Instead, each generation acted as stewards. That's a bit different, isn't it? They didn't ask, how do I finish this? They asked, how do I protect this for those who will come next? That is fundamentally a different kind of leadership. Leadership that measures success not by completion, but by continuity of intent. Imagine how many modern projects would collapse if the original leader left. Cologne Cathedral did not collapse, because leadership was never the point. For over 300 years, no stone was even laid. Yet the project survived, not because of governance, not because of funding models, not because of project schedules. It survived because it lived in their culture. Parents told their children, we're building a cathedral. Craft standards were protected even when work stopped. The vision was passed as a belief, not documentation. Culture carried what management systems couldn't. And when the world changed, the vision didn't. In the 1800s, constructions resumed. Steam power, steel, modern engineering, everything had changed except one thing. They found the original medieval plans. And they said, we will finish this exactly as they intended. Methods evolved, tools changed, but purpose remained untouched. And that's governance at its highest level. It's about protecting the why while adapting the how. It was finally completed in 1880, over 600 years after it began. David, if this was a modern project review, it would probably fail in every metric. Time, budget, multiple stoppages, interruptions to scope. Yet today it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a symbol of resilience, and it's a living, working cathedral. Because some projects can't be judged on short horizons, they create value far beyond the people who started them. So let me leave you with this. The most important question in leadership isn't, what did I finish? It's what did I start that was worth continuing.
Thanks, Eric. That is an amazing introduction to an incredible building. But I have a question for you. If you could step back into any era of the cathedral's history, which would you choose and what would you want to witness?
Great question, David. I think this is where the cathedral stops being a case study and becomes very human. If I could step back into one moment, I think I'd choose Cologne around 1560 when construction quietly stopped. Not the grand beginning and not the triumphant completion. The pause.
Why that moment?
I think that's because that's when leadership is hardest to see and easiest to misunderstand. There would be an unfinished nave, tower cranes left standing for decades, craftspeople knowing they would never ever return, no speeches, no ribbon cutting, no lessons learned workshop, just the uncomfortable reality that the project would not continue. And witness, what I'd want to witness, like a fly on the wall, I want to see what people said to each other when they realised that it might never ever be finished. I'd want to observe how the leaders framed the pause. Did they say, we failed? Or, we're stopping now, but not forever? You know that one distinction matters. One kills belief, the other preserves it. When funding dried up and priorities shifted, did they cut corners to get something done? Or did they refuse to compromise the integrity of what already existed? That's the real test of stewardship. Not when resources are abundant, but when they disappear. I'd want to hear parents explaining the half-built cathedral to their children as they walk past. I'd want to hear the masters explaining to apprentices why quality still matters. I want to hear the stories that kept the idea alive without progress to point at. That's culture at work, belief without momentum.
That's fascinating. But why not the beginning or the end?
Well, David, the beginning is optimism. Everyone believes then. That full belief, hey, we're going to make this big, fantastic cathedral. The end is validation. History does the judging for you.
But the pause?
Well, that's where intent either survives or dies. Most modern organisations fail right there at that point. When leadership changes, when budgets tighten, when the project is no longer fashionable. Cologne didn't fail in the pause. It waited. If you want to understand real leadership, don't study moments of success. Study moments of incomplete work. That's where you learn whether the purpose is real, whether culture is strong, whether leaders are builders or caretakers of belief. Or put simply, anyone can lead a project that's constantly moving, but only stewards can lead one that has stopped. And that's the moment I'd want to see and quietly ask, what did you do to make sure this wasn't the end?
Continuing on with this leadership theme, what does the cathedral teach us about holding a vision that outlives its original creators?
Another interesting question. I think this building, Cologne Cathedral, teaches us that a vision only outlives its creators if it stops belonging to them. That's the core lesson. Everything else flows from that. The cathedral was never someone's project, not an individual person's project. It became the city of Cologne's cathedral. The original builders didn't try to lock in a personal legacy or optimize it for their own lifetime or control future decisions. Instead, they embedded the vision into civic identity, faith practice, and the tradition of crafts.
Eric, can you bring this back to a key leadership lesson?
Well, if a vision needs its founder to defend it, it won't survive them. A vision that outlives its creators must be shared, not sponsored. What survived centuries was not detailed project plans, or budgets, or schedules. What survived was the clarity of intent. What this is meant to be, why it mattered, and what it must never become. The medieval drawings were powerful not because they were perfect, but because they were unambiguous.
So if we take a step back, we've been in here now for about 10 minutes. What to you is the leadership lesson?
Well, over time, detail decays, purpose endures, but if people can't restate your vision in their own words, it won't last. In this case, when work stopped, standards didn't. Stone was already laid, not rushed, not compromised, not good enough for now. Quality became a proxy for belief.
So again, what's the leadership lesson?
When progress pauses, standards are how a vision stays alive. What you refuse to lower becomes the clearest signal of what matters. So vision survives when it's protected and not pushed. No one forced the cathedral to continue. It wasn't driven by relentless urgency. It was protected from redesign for convenience, from shortcuts under pressure, from being reframed as a failure.
So I think there's another leadership lesson coming here.
Oh, definitely. Long-lived visions are held with patience, not pressure. Urgency builds speed. Protection builds endurance. We've all been working in organisations, David, where a particular project comes online and it's the most important project that we've ever been involved in. And then 2 years later, after we've done all this work, nobody even looks at it again. So it's about that protection and that endurance of a project and endurance of work. It's really, really important. Governance is the bridge between generations because when construction resumed centuries later, leaders didn't ask, should we modernise the design? So should we change it and make it, fit for purpose for today? Or should we honour it with today's tools? Honour the original design, but with the tools we've got today to make it easier to do the job. Governance preserved non-negotiables, the intent and the meaning, but it still allowed new methods, new technologies, and new people.
So I think you want to share another lesson. What's another one?
Well, the vision survives change only when its boundaries are clear. Freedom without guardrails erodes purpose. So these medieval drawings told us how it was going to be. It was unambiguous, and luckily they followed those drawings regardless of how they moved on in life. So the original creators accepted something radical. They would never see the completion of the building. They would never receive validation. They would never know even if it worked, but they built it anyway.
And now I can sense there's a really insight here. What's that insight that you want to share about the vision for me?
Again, a vision that outlives you requires you to release your need for closure. Legacy begins where control ends. Cologne Cathedral teaches us that holding a long-lived vision means shifting from ownership to stewardship. shifting from control to trust, and shifting from completion to continuity. Or in one line, a vision outlives its creators only when it becomes strong enough to survive their absence. That's the hardest kind of leadership, and it's the most enduring.
Eric, as I reflect on your thoughts, how do you think modern leaders can sustain momentum on long projects the way they did at Cologne?
Well, David, Cologne Cathedral didn't sustain momentum by constant activity. It sustained it by continuity of intent. Modern leaders can do the same, but it requires a different playbook from conventional project management. You've got to redefine the momentum. It's not about speed, it's direction. Cologne had centuries with zero physical progress, yet it didn't lose momentum, because momentum wasn't defined as the work happening, it was defined as the work still being worth doing. So the modern leadership move is we've got to stop equating momentum with busyness, but we have to treat pauses as phases and not failures. The practical test is really, if we stop this work for a year, would anyone still fight for it? If the answer is no, then the momentum was never real. Cologne survived leadership turnover because purpose was ritualized. Stories were retold, and the standards were enforced consistently.
So what do you see as a modern leadership move?
Well, you've got to create recurring rituals that reinforce the intent. Annual commitment moments or recommitment moments, safety or purpose stand-downs, and formal why do we still do this check-ins. These are not soft. They're structural reinforcements of belief. You've got to protect the non-negotiables relentlessly. When resources dried up, Cologne didn't lower standards to get something done. That restraint preserved momentum by preventing loss of trust.
So what's another modern leadership move?
Well, we've got to explicitly define what cannot be traded off. For example, fatal risk controls and design integrity. What can flex? Timelines, tools, sequencing. The rule of thumb is once you compromise the non-negotiables, momentum turns into cynicism. We've all been in organisations like this when this has happened. You've got to use story, not just strategy, and we have to carry on that vision. Cologne's vision survived because it was told, not just archived. People could actually explain what they were building. They could explain why it mattered. They could explain why stopping didn't mean quitting.
I sense there's another shift in the way we manage our leadership as well.
Well, leaders must be the chief storytellers, not just the reviewers of dashboards. They've got to regularly retell the origin story and the future promise. If leaders don't tell the story, the vacuum gets filled by rumours, shortcuts, and fatigue. We've got to design for leadership turnover because it will happen. We all know it will happen. Cologne assumed leaders would come and go. Modern organisations often pretend that they won't.
There's a real insight in that, isn't there?
Absolutely. We're all guilty of the fact that when we are working, we think we're the be-all and end-all. And the place was there long before we got there, and the place will be there long before after we leave. So we've got to be conscious of that fact. So we've got to embed intent into standards and design principles. We've got to embed intent into decision frameworks. We've got to embed intent into training and onboarding. We have to treat succession as a design requirement. It's not a risk. The hard question is, would a new leader inherit clarity or confusion? We've got to measure belief, not just progress. We all heard of Gantt charts. Cologne had no Gantt chart, but it had belief. Modern leaders can't ignore metrics, but they can expand them.
It's interesting you say that because we often feel our projects fail technically, but it's really they fail because of our behaviours. And we need to be able to measure those behaviours and measure how people engaged in the work we do. I think there's some really good indicators here. What would you suggest as possible indicators?
Well, we've got to track indicators like, these are human ones. We've got to track indicators like willingness to defend the work under pressure. We've got to track consistency of decisions across the different leaders. And we've got to track language used when times are tough. We say pause rather than use the term abandon. What people say when progress stalls tells you whether momentum is actually alive. We've got to normalise the long silence without losing commitment. Cologne has taught us counterintuitive truths. Not everything meaningful moves continuously.
That's really important. That really is. Is there a modern leadership concept there?
Absolutely. So we've got to explicitly name the slow phases. Give it a title. We've got to give people permission to wait without disengaging. And we've got to frame patience as discipline and not weakness. There's a core shift. Modern leaders sustain momentum on long projects by moving from driving to holding, moving from speed to steadiness, moving from control to stewardship. Again, stewardship, very important. Or in one line, momentum isn't something you push. It's something you protect from erosion. And that's how Cologne endured. And it's how long projects survive today.
Eric, I visited the cathedral back in 1992 on one of those big trips around the world, and what I remember most about it was how dark the cathedral was, the facade. Do you know anything about that? Why it's so black?
Oh, all the pollution, David, I reckon. That's a lot of cathedrals around the world are the same. All the, they used to have coal trains going through Cologne. They used to have the industry, and now we've got lots of cars driving around the place. So I think it's the pollution.
Can they clean it? Is it? I thought, would they give it a paint job, or what do they do?
A paint job? How dare you? Look, I think if you cleaned that cathedral, you would then find out that through the however many centuries it took to build the thing, they used different types of materials, different types of stone. It's all eroded at different times, and you'd end up with a patchwork. So you'd end up with some greys, you'd end up with some blacks, you'd end up with some browns. I think it looks much better as it is.
It's very iconic because it's I don't know if it's the only black cathedral, but it is. But it makes me reflect on when I think of cleaning, I think, I wonder how they clean it, because I was doing some research and I realised it's actually the towers are 157 metres tall, which is equivalent to a 50-storey building. I don't know if it's the biggest in the world. I'm not sure if it's the tallest. I don't know. Do you know much about that? Are there some others?
I think there's one in Münster in southern Germany, in Baden-Württemberg, the Ulm Cathedral, I think is taller than the Cologne Cathedral. But at its time, it was the biggest in the world.
It would have been.
But the Ulm Cathedral has only got one large spire, whereas Cologne's got two large spires.
Yes.
And that always seems to be under reconstruction somehow. They must always be maintaining it because of all the pollution and the erosion. So I think there's always scaffolding on it somewhere. It'd be a miracle to see it without scaffolding, I think.
And it makes me reflect on what a job it would be, because again, I was amazed to realise that it actually has the largest facade of any church in the world, which it blows me away. So I'm thinking, even if you did clean it, what a job it would be from start to finish.
I think it would be like the Sydney Harbour Bridge, David. You get up there and start painting it, and by the time you get to the other end, you've got to start again. I remember climbing one of the spires, as I mentioned earlier, and looking across to the other spire, which was covered in scaffolding, and almost waving to the workmen over the other side there. I think they've got a full-time job there.
I also remember the stained glass windows, and I believe there's over they cover 1,000 square metres. Do you have any memories of when you walked in to see the beautiful stained glass windows?
Oh, just the awe as you're walking into the place. They're just huge, and they're absolutely gorgeous, and they've all got stories to tell. They've all got depictions of different parts of the Bible and stories, etc., and history. Yeah, just magnificent. I thought the colours were just magnificent. The only contrast I have with the Cologne Cathedral and stained glass windows is Saint Michel in Paris. I'm sure you've been there and seen the big round stained glass windows, and these are the memories I've got of going to these places. So they are absolutely fascinating.
Because it's such a huge building, and to have the thought about trying to get light in is pretty impressive, because you could easily see you want it to be structurally sound, which is often brick. But back then, windows, they weren't necessarily a structural thing. So I'm amazed. And the light, it's very similar, because I know I've been to Hagia Sophia in Turkey, which is another one of our podcast series, and I was blown away by how much light they let in, and they give a huge ambience to the building. It's a really cool thing to experience.
Absolutely. I agree. I've been to Hagia Sophia as well and was amazed.
Now, rumor has it that the cathedral actually hosts a population of falcons, which makes sense because when you're that tall in the sky, no one's going to bother you. That'd be pretty amazing. I've not seen them when I was there. I don't know if you can remember.
I don't recall them, but maybe it's a bit of an analogy to the Tower of London and the ravens that are living at the Tower of London. So perhaps the falcons are protected, maybe.
Yes, that would make sense.
And looked after. Because as we know, falcons are one of the fastest birds in the world as well. So maybe they all come to Cologne Cathedral to roost. I don't know.
Yes. When I did there, now because it's so far away, far back, I don't remember the Shrine of the Three Kings. I don't remember, but it's supposed to be very significant relics in there. And I know it's been made of gold and silver and decorated with more than 1,000 gemstones. Do you remember that shrine?
I do. And I remember thinking, typical Catholic Church. All the money that's gone into this bloody building, and all the gold and jewels that have gone into this building. But I do remember there were some specific relics. I don't remember what all of them are. I thought I knew one of them, but I'm not going to repeat it here because I could offend some people. But I understand you could go down to the crypt, and I think that's where the relics were kept. And I think we had to pay extra to go down there. But again, that was 30 years ago in 1996. It was my last visit to the Cologne Cathedral. We're heading there to Germany again this year. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a chance to go to Cologne, but maybe I need to make that effort as we're traveling by train from Frankfurt to Düsseldorf. So we'll probably go through Cologne. Yes. So I'll wave at it as I go past.
Well, it'll be interesting because it's actually where those relics are is the largest in all of Europe.
Wow.
That structure where the relics are. Yes, so and it probably reflects the enormous church. It's all in proportion. It makes complete sense.
Absolutely.
So another little fact that's interesting. So the medieval cranes, as you shared with us, stood for 400 years. And the rumour has it that the actual locals used it as a weather vane as it moved around, which I think is just fantastic. But I also reflect on it. It would also have been a reminder that it's not finished. And I wonder how that would feel, because we've all been on projects where you go past something and it's not finished, and it leaves an impression with you. And sometimes that impression is you want to finish it, but others might be, I just don't want to see it anymore. I don't want to see it anymore. Have you worked on projects like that where it's a bit of an eyesore?
Have, and I haven't, if you know what I mean. So I've worked in some organisations where everything is thrown towards a particular project, then another leader comes in and goes, this is not important, so we've lost the momentum on this, we've lost the stewardship on this, and you go past a building and think, why isn't this finished? What's going on? And it can be very frustrating. But I think the beauty of the Cologne Cathedral is that they had that momentum. The people were telling stories about how important this building was to the local community and to the city. And those tower cranes were evidence of a building that's not finished. But I understand that I think they, as you said, they used as a weather vane so people could actually see which way the wind was blowing. And that was a reminder to them that one day it will be finished.
It will. And even then, I think of the cranes to stay up there for 400 years. We don't even have buildings that last 400 years, but for those cranes, whoever built them, built a really good crane.
Absolutely. Tower cranes these days, you have to do pilings meters into the ground to make sure that they stay in place. So it's amazing that those things stayed in place for so long.
Well, Eric, I think we're about to come to conclusion, our time together, and I really want to thank you for this. Because when I reflect on it, Cologne Cathedral is a building that tells a story across centuries, a story of ambition, interruption, discovery, and resilience. And for me, it's a reminder that great projects often outlive the people who start them, which I think is really important. important. And our human creativity can span generations, even though sometimes we're in this moment, sometimes what we're doing is much bigger. Whether you visit it for history, its architecture, or simply to feel the weight of time beneath its vaults, I think the cathedral offers something unforgettable. And I'm looking forward to going back and checking it out again. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, David.
Be sure to listen to our other podcasts where we connect history with project and leadership lessons.